The ground beneath your feet is not a solid foundation. It is a lid. And sometimes the lid comes off. Look at the geometry. Nature is chaotic. Nature creates jagged edges, slopes, and debris cones. But this is a cylinder, 60 feet wide, 300 feet deep. The walls are smooth. The official report blamed piping features and sewage leaks eroding the volcanic pumice. They called it a tragedy of poor infrastructure. But ask any geotechnical engineer to drill a shaft this perfect, this deep, without reinforcing the walls. And they will tell you it is impossible, unless the void was already there, waiting. We are taught that the earth is solid rock, layering down to a molten core. We build our skyscrapers, our nuclear plants, and our cities on this assumption. We are wrong. In the last decade, the frequency of catastrophic ground collapses has increased by 400%, from the frozen permafrost of Yamal to the phosphate mines of Florida. The skin of our planet is rupturing. The media calls them sinkholes. A convenient, harmless term. It implies a natural settling, a passive event. But when you analyze the seismic precursors, the low-frequency hums reported by locals days before the collapse, the sudden spikes in electromagnetic interference, a different pattern emerges. These are not random acts of God. They are systemic failures of a planetary infrastructure we barely understand. Or worse, they're the result of us digging too deep, waking things up that should have stayed buried. Geologists speak of karst topography, limestone being eaten away by acidic water over eons. That explains the small dips in your backyard. It does not explain the Brzezinski void in Russia, where a crater the size of a stadium opened up, swallowing heavy industrial machinery that vanished from radar instantly. It does not explain the Dragon Hole in the South China Sea, anoxic and isolated for millions of years, yet showing thermal signatures that defy the surrounding ocean temperatures. When we scan these sites with ground-penetrating radar, the signal often fails. It scatters. It's absorbed. Why? Because you cannot map a void that absorbs energy. Dr. Eris Thorne, a structural geologist who vanished in 2018 while investigating the Bayou Corn sinkhole, wrote in his final log, "It's not just empty space. It's negative space. The pressure isn't coming from above. It's a vacuum pulling from below. Tonight, we're going to descend. We will bypass the press releases and the sanitized government explanations. We will examine the 10 files that authorities have tried to pave over with concrete and silence. We will look at the physics of the impossible, the chemistry of the bizarre, and the human cost of the truth. From the industrial graveyards of the Soviet Union to the weaponized aquifers of the Middle East, we are going to prove that these aren't just holes in the ground. They are windows into a war being fought beneath us. A war between the fragile crust we live on and the void that wants to reclaim it. Welcome to the investigation. Start the drill. File 01, the Brzezinski consumption. Case file ID, BRZ98 Titan. Location, Brzezinski, Lean Bang Na. We begin in the Ural Mountains. This is Brzezinski. On any standard map, it is defined as a city of 150,000 souls. But in geological terms, Brzezinski is not a city. It is a thin crust of asphalt and concrete stretched desperately over a grave. Underneath these Soviet-era apartment blocks lies the Verkhnekhamskoye deposit, one of the largest potash reserves on Earth. For 70 years, they didn't just mine the salt. They hollowed out the foundation of the world. They created a honeycomb structure, a labyrinth of tunnels and caverns stretching for thousands of kilometers. The engineers called it room and pillar mining. They left columns of salt to hold up the roof, to hold up the city. It was a calculated risk, a gamble with physics. In October 2006, the gamble failed. It didn't start with a crash. It started with a brine. A specific, highly saline water began to leak into the Solikamsk 2 mine shaft. The telemetry sensors screamed. The inflow rate wasn't a trickle. It was a torrent. The water wasn't just filling the void. It was dissolving the pillars. The structural integrity of the subterranean city began to liquefy. Then came the grandfather. That is what the locals call the first massive sinkhole. It didn't just open, it inhaled. A factory processing unit, heavy machinery, and the very earth it stood on were erased in seconds. But here is the technical anomaly that the Russian Federation tries to suppress: the rate of expansion. Standard subsidence is gradual. The Brzezinski collapse defied the models of plastic flow and salt mechanics. The ground fell with an acceleration that suggests the pillars didn't just dissolve, they shattered. This implies a resonant frequency, a vibration from deep below the mine floor that snapped the salt columns like dry twigs. Dr. Alexei Volkov, a geophysicist who monitored the site until his abrupt transfer in 2012, noted a recurring seismic pulse before the water breach. His report, classified as File BR-98, suggested that the collapse wasn't an accident of mining. It was triggered. Today, the city is a ghost town in slow motion. The government builds new housing, but the cracks follow them. The surveillance cameras watch the craters 24 hours a day, waiting for the next intake of breath. When you look at the satellite imagery, you don't see a mine, you see a predator, a void that is hunting the city from below, consuming it block by block. And the scariest part? The seismic sensors are still picking up that pulse. The hunger isn't satisfied yet. File 02, the Guatemala Perfect Circle. Case File ID, GUA 2010 Sigma. Location, Guatemala City, Zone 2. From the frozen north, we descend to the tropics. But the geometry here is even colder. In May 2010, Tropical Storm Agatha was tearing through Guatemala City. The rain was torrential, masking the sound of the earth failing. But when the clouds cleared at the intersection of Zone 2, the world saw something that defied explanation. It wasn't a jagged tear in the asphalt. It was a perfect circle, 60 feet across, 300 feet deep. The walls were sheer, vertical, and terrifyingly smooth. If you dropped a stone from the edge, it would hit the bottom without ever touching the sides. The official government report blamed the city's sewage system. They claimed a burst pipe had eroded the volcanic pumice soil, a process known as piping. They said the water washed away the foundation, creating a cavern that eventually collapsed. But look closer at the physics. Water erosion is chaotic. It created irregular shapes, sloped sides, and debris cones at the bottom. The 2010 anomaly had none of these. It looked less like a collapse and more like a surgical extraction. It was a puncture wound in the crust of the earth. Furthermore, where did material go? To create a hole of that volume, thousands of tons of soil and rock had to be displaced. Yet, the bottom of the shaft was surprisingly empty. It was as if the earth hadn't fallen down. It had been vaporized, or pulled into a vacuum so deep that the debris never hit the bottom. Local residents reported hearing a strange mechanical hum in the weeks leading up to the event. Not the grinding of shifting soil, but a steady, low-frequency vibration. Was this a test of a subterranean-born technology? A weaponized use of sonic resonance to liquefy the soil instantly? Before independent geologists could lower their equipment into the abyss, the military moved in. They didn't study it. They filled it. Truckload after truckload of cement, rocks, and debris were poured in to throw the anomaly, sealing it shut. They buried the evidence under layers of concrete, just as they did with a similar perfect circle that appeared in the same city just 3 years prior. 2 impossible holes, 1 city, and a silence that is deafening. File 03, the Daiichi Subsidence. Case File ID, FUK 2016 Recover, Elos Ateo en Fukuoka, Japan. Precision, that is the heartbeat of Japan. Trains run to the second. Infrastructure is maintained with obsessive care. So when a 5-lane highway in the heart of Fukuoka's business district collapses, it is not just an accident, it is a violation of physics. On November 8, 2016 at 5:15 a.m., The asphalt outside Hackett Station didn't just crack, it surrendered. A massive sinkhole, 30 meters wide and 15 meters deep, opened up, severing power, gas, and water lines. The footage shows the traffic light still changing from green to red, suspended over a chasm of churning, muddy water. The official narrative was immediate. A subway extension project gone wrong. Groundwater had weakened the bedrock, a standard engineering failure. But pay attention to what happened next. This is where the story shifts from civil engineering to containment. Within 48 hours, the hole was gone. The international media applauded the Japanese efficiency. They marveled at how workers poured 6,200 cubic meters of sand and cement into the void, working nonstop to reopen the road in just 2 days. It was hailed as a miracle of construction. But any geotechnical expert looking at the timeline will tell you, you do not fill a void of that magnitude in 48 hours if you care about stability. You need weeks for the soil to settle. You need to map the extent of the cavity. You need to ensure the water table has restabilized. Unless stability wasn't the goal, unless the goal was sealing. Kenji Sato, a junior surveyor on the subway project, logged an anomaly in the days leading up to the collapse. His sensors didn't show the ground settling downwards. They showed pressure pushing upwards. The water filling the hole wasn't just groundwater. It was frothing. It was pressurized. The speed of the repair suggests panic. They weren't fixing a road. They were plugging a breach. They dumped a specific fluidized soil mixture, a quick-setting industrial compound designed to harden instantly, turning the underground cavity into a solid block of stone. They were entombing whatever had broken through the subway walls. A week after the road reopened, the ground sank again 7 centimeters. A warning. The government said it was expected settling. But Sato's logs were scrubbed from the municipal server. The road is open today. The cars drive over it. But beneath that fresh layer of asphalt and the thousands of tons of quick-dry cement, the pressure is building again. They didn't fix the problem. They just put a lid on it. File 04, the Bayou Corn Vortex. Case file ID, LOU 12 methane location, Assumption Parish, Louisiana, USA. From the concrete canyons of Japan, we move to the suffocating humidity of the American South. Here, the ground doesn't just crack. It liquefies. August 3rd, 2012. Bayou Corn, a quiet community of 350 residents, woke up to the smell of diesel and sulfur. The water in the bayou began to boil, not with heat, but with gas. Methane bubbles the size of basketballs were breaking the surface, turning the swamp into a toxic jacuzzi. Then the trees started to move. Cypress trees, centuries old, stood straight one moment and were sucked down the next. They didn't fall over. They slid vertically into the muck, swallowed whole by a slurry of mud and hydrocarbons. The official story? A collapsed salt cavern. Specifically, the Oxy-Geismar 3, operated by Texas Brine. They said the cavern wall had been breached, allowing sediment to pour in and gas to escape. A classic case of industrial negligence. But the data tells a darker story. Dr. Eris Thorne, remember that name from the introduction, was one of the first independent geologists on site. His initial readings, before the area was declared a no-fly zone, showed isotopic signatures in the methane that didn't match the geological profile of the salt dome. He found traces of synthetic compounds, chemicals used in deep earth fracking, but also in clandestine waste disposal. The sinkhole wasn't just a collapse, it was a regurgitation. The void beneath Bayou Corn is now over 35 acres wide and hundreds of feet deep. It breathes. The seismic monitors installed around the perimeter pick up burps, tremors caused by massive gas releases deep underground. The residents were evacuated. Their homes were bought out. Non-disclosure agreements were signed. The town is now a dead zone, patrolled by private security. Why so much security for a natural disaster? Because the hole is still growing. And whatever was stored in that salt cavern, Whatever chemical cocktail they were trying to hide in the dark is now mixing with the aquifer. The trees are gone. The people are gone. But the bubbles are still rising. File 05, the Yamal craters. Case file ID, SIB-14, cryolocation. Yamal Peninsula, Siberia, Russia. Yamal, in the language of the indigenous Nenets people, it translates to the end of the world. In July 2014, helicopter pilots flying over this frozen wasteland spotted something that shouldn't exist. A black void punched into blinding white permafrost. This was not a collapse. This was an eruption. When geologists arrived at the rim of the first crater, labeled GC1, they found the soil scattered outward. Blocks of frozen earth the size of cars had been hurled up to 900 meters away. The physics here are reversed. A standard sinkhole is a vacuum. This was a cannon shot. The official explanation from the Russian Academy of Sciences was cryovolcanism. They claimed that pockets of methane gas, trapped in the permafrost of millennia, were expanding due to climate change until the pressure blew the cap off, a ticking time bomb of nature. But the geometry defies the chaotic nature of a gas leak. The walls of the Yamal craters are polished, vertical. They plunge 70 meters down into darkness before hitting water. Dr. Igor Yeltsov, a specialist in Troynite explosives, noted that the energy release required to displace that volume of frozen soil, harder than concrete, is equivalent to a tactical nuclear device. Yet, there was no radiation. Then there is the sound. Reindeer herders in the area reported feeling the ground shiver for days before the blast. Not a quake, but a vibration, a hum. And when the craters opened, they didn't just release methane. They released a strange, gray slurry that coated the landscape. We are told these are isolated incidents. But since 2014, satellite imagery has identified 17 more giant craters appearing in the region. What if the permafrost isn't just melting? What if it's being heated from below? The Yamal Peninsula sits on top of vast natural gas reserves. Yes, but it also sits on top of classified Cold War infrastructure. Deep, hardened silos designed to survive the apocalypse. If the cooling systems of those forgotten facilities failed, if the heat from a decaying reactor core began to bleed into the ice, the result would look exactly like this. The Earth isn't just warming up. In Siberia, it is cooking from the inside out. File 06, the Qatar Depression Anomaly. Case file ID, Q80 World War II project location, Western Desert, Egypt. The desert has a memory, and in the Qatar Depression, vast stretches of sand act less like solid ground and more like a fluid trap. This is the lowest point in Africa, 133 meters below sea level. A natural sinkhole on a continental scale. But within this vast basin, there are specific zones, the soft spots, that defy geological explanation. In 1977, an oil prospecting team from a Western conglomerate ventured into the depression's northern sector. They were mapping the bedrock. They never finished. One of their heavy transport trucks, a 6-wheel behemoth designed for dunes, didn't get stuck. It sank. The driver reported that the ground suddenly lost all cohesion. It turned into a liquid. Within 3 minutes, the vehicle was gone. No trace, no wreckage, just a smooth patch of sand that looked identical to the rest of the desert. The locals call it Devil's Ground. Scientists call it dixotropy, the property of certain clays and sands to become fluid when agitated by vibration. But what is causing vibration in the middle of a desolate wasteland? History provides a terrifying clue. In the 1950s, the CIA and the Egyptian government discussed the Qatar project. The plan was ambitious. Excavate a canal from the Mediterranean to the Depression, flooding it to create a massive hydroelectric inland sea. To move that much earth, they proposed using peaceful nuclear explosions. Hundreds of them. Official records say the plan was scrapped due to radiation concerns. But Geiger counter readings taken near the sink site show background radiation levels 3 times higher than the surrounding desert. And the seismic signatures of the sand resemble those of soil that has been subjected to extreme shock waves, the kind that shatter the granular structure of silica, turning it into a permanent quicksand. Did they test the bombs? Did they fracture the bedrock, creating a drain that is slowly sucking the desert down into the aquifer below? The oil company never recovered the truck. They simply redrew the map. They marked the sector as structurally unstable and left. The sand doesn't drift there. It waits. File 07. The Devil's Sinkhole. Case File ID. Tex Edwards Acoustic Location. Rock Springs, Texas, USA. In the heart of Edwards County, Texas. The ground opens up into a bell-shaped void. It is a national natural landmark. They call it the Devil's Sinkhole. Every evening, 3 million Mexican free-tailed bats spiral out of the darkness like smoke. It is a spectacle of nature. But beneath the screech of the bats, there is another sound, a sound that you don't hear with your ears, but feel in your bones. The sinkhole plunges 400 feet down, widening at the bottom to create a massive cathedral of rock. Geologically, it is a collapse feature. Acoustically, it is a perfect parabolic dish. In 2011, an amateur spelunking team recorded background noise levels inside the cavern. They expected silence or the rustle of guano beetles. Instead, their equipment picked up a consistent, rhythmic pulse at 7 hertz. 7 hertz is in the ELF range, extremely low frequency. It is the frequency used by the U.S. Navy to communicate with submarines deep underwater, because these waves can penetrate solid rock and salt water. Why is a natural sinkhole resonating at a military frequency? Look at the map. The Edwards Plateau is limestone, highly conductive for certain wavelengths. The sinkhole itself acts as a natural amplifier, a geological subwoofer. Official tours are strictly controlled. You cannot go to the bottom without a research permit, which is rarely granted. The reason given is bat conservation. But consider this. Less than 50 miles away, there are unmarked antenna arrays that have been linked to the decommissioned Project Sanguine. Is it possible that the Devil's Sinkhole isn't just a habitat? Is it possible that the military identified this unique geological structure decades ago and repurposed it? Not as a base, but as a massive, passive listening device. A natural ear pressed against the limestone, listening for the tremors of underground nuclear tests on the other side of the world. The bats are the perfect cover. Their ultrasonic cries mask the low-frequency hum that never stops. The devil is indeed in the details. File 08, the Serra-Suriname Isolation. Case File ID, Ventepuy Biolocation, Bolivar State, Venezuela. Deep in the Amazon, rising vertically from the jungle floor, are the tepuys, houses of the gods. Flat-topped mountains that have been cut off from the rest of the world for millions of years. They are biological islands in the sky. But on top of one specific mountain, Serra-Suriname, there are holes. In 1964, pilot Harry Gibson was flying over the dense canopy when he saw them. Massive, green eyes staring up at him. Not lakes, not craters. Vertical shafts plunging into the heart of the mountain. These are the Simas. The largest is 350 meters wide and equally deep. You could fit the Eiffel Tower inside, and the tip wouldn't reach the rim. Geologically, this shouldn't exist. The tepuys are made of quartzite sandstone, one of the hardest rocks on the planet. It does not dissolve like limestone. Acid rain does not carve it. Water runs off it. So what created a perfect, cylindrical void in solid quartz? The standard theory is suffosion, underground rivers eroding softer rock beneath, causing the roof to collapse. But there are no rivers on top of a tepuy. When the first expedition descended in 1974, they didn't just find rocks. They found a lost world. The ecosystem at the bottom of Sima Humboldt has evolved in complete isolation. The plants are carnivorous, but they don't eat flies. They are massive, designed to trap larger prey. The frogs don't hop, they crawl, because for eons they had nowhere to go. But the real danger isn't the wildlife we can see. It is what we can't. Dr. Elena Corazon, a microbiologist who illegally sampled the water at the bottom of the Sima in 2008, found bacteria that had no genetic match in the GenBank database. These were paleopathogens, sealed in a stone petri dish since the Jurassic period. She noted that the quartzite walls showed microscopic signs of being eaten, not by water, but by a biological agent, a lithotrophic bacteria that consumed silica. The indigenous Yikwana people refuse to go near the mountain. They say the holes are the mouths of an evil spirit that makes a sound like sorry, sorry, as it chews the mountain from the inside. Perhaps the holes aren't collapses at all. Perhaps they are quarantine zones. Nature's way of burying something that consumes the very rock of the earth. And we just broke the seal. File 09, the Dragon Hole. Case file ID, SCS Blue, 300 location, Paracel Islands, South China Sea. We leave the canopy for the abyss. In the contested waters of the South China Sea, there is a puncture in the coral reef known as the Dragon Hole. Locally, it is the eye of the sea. For centuries, fishermen avoided it. They said the Monkey King pulled his golden cudgel from this spot, leaving a wound in the ocean floor that never healed. In 2016, a submersible finally reached the bottom. The depth gauge read 300.89 meters. It is the deepest blue hole on Earth. But depth isn't the anomaly. The anomaly is the stillness. Below 100 meters, the water in the Dragon Hole is completely anoxic. There is no oxygen. There is no life. And most terrifyingly, there is no current. The water at the bottom has not circulated with the open ocean for thousands of years. It is a perfect stagnant preservation chamber. Now, think like a strategist. If you had something dangerous, a damaged nuclear core from a submarine, a container of experimental biological waste, or an artifact you didn't want the world to see, where would you put it? You wouldn't bury it in the ground where water tables shift. You would drop it here, in a deep oxygen-free, current-free void where metal doesn't rust and biological matter doesn't decay. Detailed sonar scans of the bottom reveal irregularities in the sediment, rectangular shapes, metallic densities. The Dragon Hole isn't just a natural wonder. It is a natural vault. And since 2016, the surrounding area has been heavily militarized, not just to claim the islands, but perhaps to guard the lid of the world's deepest garbage can. File 10, the Dead Sea receding. Case file ID, ISR geolocation, the Dead Sea coastline. We have traveled from the ice of Russia to the depths of the ocean. Now we arrive at the lowest point on the face of the earth, the Dead Sea. This is the end of the line. Here, the ground isn't just opening up occasionally. It is disintegrating. In 1990, there were fewer than 50 sinkholes on the coast. Today, there are over 6,000. This is not a geological event. It is a geological massacre. As the water level of the Dead Sea drops, 1 meter every single year due to industrial extraction and damming of the Jordan River, fresh groundwater rushes in to fill the void. This fresh water dissolves the ancient subterranean salt layers that have held up the ground for 10,000 years. The result is a geological domino effect. Whole resorts have been abandoned. Roads snap like wafers. A tourist can be walking on solid ground 1 second and be swallowed by a 20-meter pit the next. But the terrifying truth, the File 10 revelation, is that this was predicted. In the 1980s, hydrological models warned that diverting the Jordan River would weaponize the geology of the entire region. They knew the salt would dissolve. They knew the land would collapse. They did it anyway. This is the ultimate proof of the suppression formula. The destruction of the landscape was considered an acceptable collateral damage for water rights. The Dead Sea is dying, and in its death throes, it is pulling the land down with it. It is a preview of the future. As we drain our aquifers globally, as we hollow out the crust for lithium and oil, The support structures of our continents are failing. The Dead Sea isn't an anomaly anymore. It is a forecast.